Good morning, a warm welcome to the first African Futures Conference. We are delighted to have you join us online for what we hope will become an annual event to explore Africa's futures through different methodologies and analysis. Today, we have an exciting lineup of speakers who will introduce us to various methodologies for envisioning the path forward for the continent. This conference brings together foresight experts, researchers, policymakers, and practitioners from around the world to discuss Africa's unique challenges and opportunities. Throughout the day, you will hear from 3 keynote speakers, 22 presenters as they delve into the various issues around politics, education, environment, and energy futures on the continent. We encourage you to ask questions and engage the speakers. And we hope that you could join us for the third session of the conference, which is our training on the international futures model that we use at the African Futures. Before we kickstart the conversation, we have a few housekeeping announcements. This session is being live streamed on our YouTube channel. And also for our brothers and sisters from the Francophone countries, we have a French translation available. So please do tune in for our French translation. And we kindly ask our audience to also keep our microphones muted and your video switch off so that we can maximize our connectivity. Without much further delay, we would like to start the conference by taking the opening remarks from the Executive Director of the ISS, Dr. Akun Fonte.
It's a pleasure to welcome you to the first African Futures Conference, dedicated to navigating Africa's futures, forecasting development trends and opportunities. The opportunities for Africa are tremendous, despite current global flux. And it could be argued that global dynamics have as much impact on Africa as Africa could impact global dynamics as well. But how do we make it happen? We've got to expand the prism of our view towards the future, looking at multiple aspects that actually inform Africa fulfilling its tremendous potential. First of all, it's worth situating the continent as one in transition. What does that transition mean? It means there are tremendous risks as well as opportunities. And this conference allows us to actually unpack the different factors that Africa needs at national level, at the level of regional economic communities, but coming up to the African Union level as well, to materialize, in fact, Agenda 2063, particularly fulfill the objectives set in the second 10-year implementation plan. Let's start off with the ambition that every African country reaches middle income status by 2032. That ambition is achievable, and you would be actually charting credible scenarios and pathways to attaining that ambition. The second aspect I would like to highlight is the necessity to think seriously around leapfrogging, built on industrialization, agriculture, trade, and technology. Africa is not just the continent of the future, it actually is the continent that could drive current transformations. The third aspect I would like to underline is Africa's agency. Africa's agency is as much embedded in its diverse continental picture as it is with its particularities. And that diversity has to be embraced. Because this continent has 54 countries doesn't mean that there cannot be consensus on the issues that actually bind us. For example, the issue of debt. Too many African countries are saddled with debt, and the current global context provides a tremendous opportunity for this continent to actually advance a credible way to actually detach Africa from the debt that it's carrying so that the continent could actually materialize those kinds of investments that it needs in accessing capital needed to drive the transformation that the continent and its people seek. I hope that you would have very good proceedings and robust exchanges. We don't just want to have conversations here. We want to have conversations that have impact in both policy spaces and programming. We want to be able to take these discussions to policy tables around the continent and say, this is what the conversation was about, and these are credible pathways to actually driving and materializing Africa's potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fonte. To proceed with the conference, we would like to take an opening remarks from the CEO of Order NEPAD, Mrs. Nados Bekele Thomas, who is an important partner for the ISS and the African Futures in the work that we do. Whilst we are waiting to take that, I would like to remind us to mute our microphones and switch off our videos so that we can maximize our connectivity on that front. But however, do use the chat function to tell us who is in the room, tell us your name and where you are joining us from in the chat function. Let's keep it active and engaging already.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the African Futures Conference. Today, we gather not only to envision Africa's future, but to actively shape it. This event embodies our shared commitment to a resilient, prosperous Africa, ready to meet the demands of a rapidly evolving world. At the African Union Development Agency, our NEPAD, our mission is to guide this transformation. Our work spans infrastructure, industrialization, technology and artificial intelligence, climate resilience, agriculture and education. Together, these sectors reflect Africa's resolve to tackle the critical transitions that lie before us: demographic, ecological, industrial, energy, technological, and socio-political. Added to these is perhaps the most profound shift of our time, the transition driven by the AI revolution. Our partnership, ladies and gentlemen, with the African Futures and Innovation Program at the Institute of Security Studies, ISS, is essential to this mission. Through initiatives like our Policy Bridge Tank, we equip Africa's leaders with tools to anticipate and act on emerging threats. With ISS, we are transforming foresight into action, crafting evidence-based policies that meet today's challenges and tomorrow's possibilities. One of our greatest areas of focus is the technology and AI revolution. We are at a pivotal moment where technological change and artificial intelligence are redefining how we live and work. Ladies and gentlemen, for Africa, technological change presents immense opportunities, from revolutionizing education and healthcare to enhancing agricultural productivity and creating new pathways for job growth. But we are equally mindful of the ethical, social, and regulatory challenges it brings. By preparing today, we ensure that AI serves Africa's development goals, building an inclusive future that leaves no one behind. Our work with ISS, including the African Futures website, is expanding our understanding of these threats. Through comprehensive sector analysis across education, employment, agriculture, free trade, and more, we are crafting recommendations for each African nation and the 8 regional economic communities recognized by the African Union. These insights, ladies and gentlemen, guide leaders in creating policies that not only address immediate needs, but align with the broader aspirations of Agenda 2063. The technological and AI revolution, along with climate change and shifting demographics, calls for bold thinking and strategic action. In our collaboration with ISS, we are exploring Africa's energy future, championing renewable solutions, and building resilience to climate impacts. We are also preparing to harness Africa's demographic dividend by reshaping our education systems and reimagining the future of work. AI will play a central role here, helping us leap forward in many ways that were unimaginable just a few years ago. This conference, ladies and gentlemen, is not just a gathering. It is a catalyst for action. The insights and strategies generated here will inform policies, drive innovation, and set a course for resilience and sustainable growth across Africa. Together, let's harness this moment to build a future that is not only prosperous, but genuinely transformative for our continent. Thank you for your commitment and dedication. Let us shape Africa's future together.
Thank you to the other NEPAD, an important partner for the work that we do here at the AFI and the ISS. I'm excited in the chat function. I've seen that people have joined us from all over Africa and across Europe and Asia and other parts of the world. We are expecting more people to join us as we have over 600 people that have registered for this conference. So we are going to kickstart the conversation of our keynote addresses. And to do that, we like to welcome our very own Dr. Yaki Silias, who is the head of the African Futures Innovation Program and the chairman of the ISS Board of Trustees, to give us a presentation on what is Africa's future for this conference. Over to you, Dr. Silias.
Morning, Enoch, and thank you very much. That was really an inspirational opening, both by Dr. Akum and Mrs. Bekele Thomas. So I'm going to share screen and take you to the African Futures and Innovation website. I hope that you can see that. So
we can see that, Yaki.
Thank you very much, Enoch. So everything I'm going to show you is available on the Futures website. And I'm going to navigate on the African Futures website to the themes. I'm going to talk on the combined scenario. All the pages on the website look more or less the same. I'm going to scroll down and go to what we refer to as the combined scenario, or a slider on the combined scenario. On the left-hand side, you can see a content button, which if you click on that, gives you a menu. And at the bottom left, you can see the artificial intelligence button. Let us look at what we do and on Africa's potential future. So the initial story is one in which at independence, the average GDP per capita of Africa was about 51% of the rest of the world. But by 2023, it's only a quarter, 25%. So things are improving in Africa, but more slowly than elsewhere. And I think we all know this reality. Africa is falling further and further behind average income levels in the rest of the world. Of course, the rest of the world includes the United States, China, Europe, and so on. And that is that story in a graphic. So this is from 1960 with a forecast till 2043, constant 2017 US dollars. We can see the 2007-2008 financial crisis. We can see the impact of COVID. But clearly, you can see from 1960 with a forecast until 2043, until about 2022, this is data, but with a forecast till 2043, a widening gap between GDP per capita in Africa and GDP per capita in the rest of the world. This is a concerning picture. So on our current path forecast, we believe that till 2043, the African economy will grow at about 4.7%. So that's 4.7% average growth rate for all of Africa's 54 or 55 countries, if you include the Western Sahara. Now, since the population increases at an average rate of 2.3% per year, per capita income growth will only average about 1.4% from 2024 till 2043. 1.4% is Africa needs 3-4 times that level of growth if it is really going to eliminate poverty. And by 2043, GDP per capita in Africa will only be 23% of the average of the rest of the world, and Africa will have 3 times more the numbers of extremely poor people than the combined total in the rest of the world. These are sobering forecasts. So on this website and the work that we do at the African Futures and Innovation Program, we first look at where Africa is headed on its so-called current path, or the business as usual forecast. Then we model 8 scenarios. Each of them is a single positive scenario for every African country, and we do the forecast at national level. We forecast what is the impact of a more rapid demographic transition and investments in better health and wash infrastructure. Remember that Africa is still about 2 decades away from entering a potential demographic window of opportunity. At the moment, labor is still a drag on growth in much of Africa. Second, we model the impact of better and more education, and we model quantity, quality, and relevance, and we do that for primary, lower secondary, upper secondary, and tertiary level. Then we model the impact of large infrastructure and leapfrogging. We look at what is the impact of renewables, ICT, and large infrastructure builds such as ports and so on Africa's development future. Africa, as we know, trails on large infrastructure, and there are significant investments on the continent. The next scenario we model is improved food security resulting in an agricultural revolution. We like to speak about Africa's agricultural potential, but the reality is that Africa has not had a modern agricultural revolution, and development is literally not possible without food security. Then we model a low-end manufacturing transition. Manufacturing is the escalator that moves most rapidly upward, more rapidly than services or agriculture. Eventually, Africa needs to get on that manufacturing escalator. The next scenario we model is the full implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area, and we look at what is that impact on Africa. Which we know Africa, trade with your neighbors adds more value than trading with countries or regions far away. The 6th scenario we model is more rapid inward financial flows consisting of more aid, more foreign direct investment, remittances, and a reduction in illicit financial flows. We all know the importance, particularly of foreign direct investment. Aid is still important for Africa, but as a portion of government revenues, it's declining. And then we try and model governance, and we say governance consists of 3 dimensions: stability, capacity, and inclusion. And I will, in one of the sessions, I will be speaking on how we model governance. So if we put these 8, so we model 8 positive scenarios, we put them together in a combined scenario, which in a sense represents Africa's development potential. So graphically, that's what we do. We look at the bottom at Africa's current development trajectory, which is a trajectory of slow growth, rapid growth by comparable standards to other countries, but for Africa with its rapidly growing population, very slow. And then we model a single positive scenario for every African country in each of those 8 sectors, which gives us also a synergistic impact, because somebody who is better educated and more healthy gives you a productivity boost. And that, as I've said, is Africa's development potential. We generally use 2043 as a time horizon, so our forecasts are more or less 2 decades into the future. That is in line with the African Union's Agenda 2063, and the reason why we have such an important partnership with the ODA-NEPAD agency, which is responsible for Agenda 2063. Now, for our forecasting, we use a global integrated assessment model, the International Futures Forecasting Platform, which is hosted and developed at the University of Denver. IFS is a long-term integrated global forecasting system designed to facilitate the exploration of global futures. It does so for, I think, 189 countries now, and you can look to the end of the century. So it helps us to understand dynamics within and across global systems and to think systematically about potential trends. This afternoon at 5 o'clock South African time, Professor Jonathan Moyer will in actual fact demonstrate IFS and give a brief introduction to IFS. It forecasts across 12 dynamically connected modules, but each module is in a sense very comprehensive and stimulates how changes in one module may lead to changes in another. What is very important is IFS is free and open source. You can download it, you can use it, you can play around with it. It is by far the most developed forecasting platform available globally. This is what IFS looks like. The 12 modules, remember each of these modules is in itself a comprehensive forecasting system. So socio-political, education, population, agriculture, technology, environmental resources and quality, energy, infrastructure, economy, health, international politics. And these subsystems all interact with one another. So if we do what we say on this website, we combine those 8 sectors into a combined scenario, Africa's population will be smaller because the more as incomes improve, fertility rates come down. Only 7.7% of Africans will live in poverty in 2043 instead of 17%. We know that Africa is going to miss the SDG goal of eliminating extreme poverty by 2030 by a large margin. Africa's GDP per capita will be 41% of the average of the rest of the world, because on the current path forecast, it will only be 26%. It's not a doubling, but a huge improvement. And the African economy will be 6.4% of global GDP instead of 4.3%. Of course, more rapid growth releases more additional carbon. And we have on the African Futures website done a very comprehensive analysis of Africa's energy transition. We evaluate the impact of these scenarios then on Africa's energy transition, climate change, employment, jobs. We've also, I think, done quite unique work on gender and development. We model the impact of gender equity on development. And we also we've developed 4 global scenarios where we look at what is the impact of global developments on Africa's future. Now, we don't have a crystal ball. We cannot predict the future, but we can assist in providing a tool to which we can frame to think in a coherent manner about the future. So that's once we've done in the middle of that cloud, the 8 sectors and model that for every African country, we then look at the impact of climate change, Africa and the world, energy, gender and employment on the African Futures website. Strong developmentally minded governments are required that provide leadership that regulates, empowers, and supports productive investment. Africa doesn't need the best government. It needs good enough government. And we need to unlock our human capital potential, which is less about grand schemes and ambitions, but it's about good management and policy predictability. There's no magic pill. There's no instant solution to Africa's development. There is a long, hard slog that will lie ahead. And eventually, only Africans can develop Africa. China, India, the United States, Europe can help, and we can't do it in isolation, but we need to seize the responsibility for Africa's development through modern capable leadership and through evidence policy making and not ideology. We find very often that leadership in Africa and governing elites are trapped in ideological infighting. And please have a look at what we've done on in the Africa and the World component of the website. We frame we conclude our analysis by pointing to some very obvious things that Africa must follow how rich countries got rich. We need to do the same thing, invest in food security and then agro-processing, pursue a manufacturing growth path where possible, with ongoing support to the agricultural sector and the knowledge-based services. Modern technology can help, but if you want to leapfrog, the first thing is you need household electricity for every African, And then you need to provide them with affordable and fast broadband internet access. We need to invest in a knowledge economy, such as decentralized cottage industries. We need to reduce our dependency on commodity exports to diversify our economies and use modern technology to provide services and access to government services. Absolutely critical is for Africa to more rapidly go through its demographic transition. I want to re-emphasize what I said earlier. Africa's got such a young and rapidly growing population that population, rapid increasing population, is a drag on growth for the next 3 decades. We need to plan our urbanization. Urbanization in Africa is the most rapid in the world, and it is going to smother development in cities if we do not plan for it and use the opportunity of more rapid urbanization to plan and to mitigate the effects of climate change. We need to learn from China how governments can alleviate poverty. Chinese have set a global gold standard on how to do this. We need to have democracy is the future in Africa. There can be no return to authoritarian government. And that means we should use the benefits of regular political turnover. We need to work hard to attract foreign direct investment, and that, amongst others, means that governments must be adequately funded to be able to do that. So, colleagues, that is the end of my presentation with regard to the long-term future of Africa. What I've shown you is all available on the African Futures and Innovation platform. There's more than 4,000 charts on the website. I went to the theme on the combined scenario. There are the global scenarios, there are the various themes, and if you click on the geographies, you can find a long-term forecast of every African country. So, thanks very much for allowing me to speak to you this morning and to give you a taste of the work that the African Futures and Innovation Program does.
Thank you very much, Yaki, for the excellent presentation. The link to the website has already been pasted in the chat function, so I encourage colleagues to check the website out and find out about the important topics that Yaki has spoken about. To move to our next presentation, we have Reshma Francis, who is the Associate Director for the World Energy Council, to take us through energy transition, such an important topic in Africa on energy forecasting and energy transition. Over to you, Reshma.
Thank you very much. Firstly, good morning to all of us who have gathered in our corner of the internet here. It's a fantastic turnout, as I see. Thank you, and I'm very honored to be here on behalf of the World Energy Council, to be on the agenda of the inaugural Africa Futures Conference. And the previous speakers have been very inspiring, really bringing a lot of attention into a lot of what we are doing at the World Energy Council. We are the world's leading member-based global energy network. We have over 3,000 member organizations spanning over 100 countries, and we are independent, non-political, and cover the whole energy system. And what I want to bring today is to address some of those topics or themes that I heard earlier, which is about the socio-economic transformations, the need for evidence-based policy making. And today I want to share a framework that the World Energy Council and our community has formulated over more than a decade ago. Let me just pull up my slides and let me know if you can already see it.
Yes, we can see the slide.
So I'm going into presentation mode. So I would like to bring you a framework, which is the World Energy Trilemma framework. That is the act of balancing across and creating and understanding the trade-offs when you're making policy decisions, right? The energy trilemma's history goes back almost 2 decades ago. So that's in 2000, when the community of the Council responded to the new demands for energy and sustainable development by establishing the 3 A's, which were called the accessibility to modern, affordable energy for all, availability in terms of continuity of supply, and quality and the reliability of the service. And then there's 3, which is acceptability in terms of the social and environmental goals which it needs to meet and how it's being accepted. These 3 are the ones that evolved to become the pillars of the World Energy Trilemma as we know it today. But how has it been used? So the idea is also to connect with the future thinking. So looking at these 3 A's with a futures lens, and there was the future piece where we looked at energy policy scenarios to see how these 3 A's move, and that was already back in 2007. How do these 3 A's evolve when you're looking at different scenarios, and what does that mean for energy policies and practices? Back in 2008 was our first edition for the assessment of energy policy and practices. And when we started with the World Energy Trilemma, we were looking at the 88 member countries we had at that time, and was then launched at the COP15 in Copenhagen. But it's in 2013 that we covered over 120 countries, and we made it a truly global index and network. But here we are in the centennial year. It's 100 years since the World Energy Council has been formed. And we've taken a radical decision to redesign the World Energy Trilemma because we have identified a change in trend in terms of how you define our 3 pillars. And unless we redefine these 3 pillars, it would really be, we would have a blind spot. We would really miss connecting the dots in the future for the future energy transitions, which should be just and resilient. So what are our 3 pillars and how do we define it? The 3 pillars are energy security, energy equity, and environmental sustainability. And these are the top 3 action priorities across, I think, on the minds of all policymakers today. So energy security reflects a nation's capacity to meet current and future energy demand reliably, and to bounce back swiftly from system shocks with minimal disruptions to supply. Energy equity is, of course, to assess the country's ability to provide universal access to affordable, fairly priced and abundant energy for domestic and commercial use. And environmental sustainability is broader than CO2 emissions. It is to represent the country's transition of the energy system towards mitigating and avoiding potential environmental harm and climate change impacts. But what we have seen in our work, so we have launched the World Energy Trilemma report in April 2024 on the sidelines of our flagship event, which is the World Energy Congress. We had it in Rotterdam this year, and that's when we culminated the work where we have been talking to our community to identify what's changing. That really was the question, more than what is the definition, but really we looked at our 6 different regions to say what's changing, what's new on the horizon for energy security, equity, and sustainability. So what we see is security has definitely widened beyond just geopolitics to demand-driven shocks that we see with the case of the invasion of Ukraine, and at the same time, the increasing or the creeping in of extreme weather events, technology dependencies, critical minerals. These are the key themes which are, which are part of the energy security conversation today. Energy equity is not just about the access and affordability, but really about connecting between the cost of the transition to the price that one has to pay, and to really what's the value that's being generated with this transition. And environmental sustainability is, like I said, far more than just a CO2 emission, but it's about the rate of phase-ins and phase-outs. It's about respecting the planetary boundaries, circularity, biofuels and biodiversity. All of these are conversations which are coming in to the environmental sustainability pillar as we see within our community and beyond. So diving deeper into the energy security pillar, what we have identified is we need to evolve with resilience, and that really is the theme. And this is being defined very differently. First on top, of course, is the geopolitical impacts, how that affects the access to the fossil fuel, as well as renewable energy technologies. And then there is the impact of climate change. So we have examples in our report which talks about how grid standards need to change to withstand climate change impacts, such as the stronger typhoons, how that needs to be updated. In Latin America, we see the impacts of hydropower vulnerabilities, how that it needs reform, and we need to really consider and measure and talk about it to really address energy security. Similarly, there is the rise of renewables changes the definition of what energy system reliability means. It It requires more energy storage, grid investments, and smart technologies to really balance demand and supply in futures which have a higher penetration of renewables, the supply chain vulnerability. So as we shift to certain technologies which are going to dominate in our network, there is a shift onto the supply chains that feed these technologies. So what about the critical minerals? What about the geopolitical risks of those access to those critical minerals? And how do we diversify to mitigate any future crises? Energy demand management and consumer roles. So as is the case with Africa or Asia and other emerging economies, what we see is that demand is going to rise. But how do we transform that demand to be a participant in the energy transformation of, as an active contributor to the balancing act of supply and demand? Then the role of decentralized supply. The rise of decentralized systems, so renewables do play a large role in reaching remote areas. How do they rise and support the energy security? And that's something we need to measure, because there are countries which are putting a lot of effort into decentralized systems. So how does that strengthen and define energy security? And the transition away from fuel. So we do have countries which are dependent on fossil fuel exports, and how are they transforming and what are they doing to transition away from fossil fuels as part of the economic diversification. And then a key element is the social license to operate. How do communities participate, and do they support the energy transition? And that also defines how you have to address energy security concerns. When we move into equity, like I said, it's about connecting cost, price, and value, and it is about defining what are the elements which are part of cost, and who is paying the price for that cost as well. Price, of course, there is the consumer energy prices, but how are subsidies part of this equation? And does that need to be addressed and need to be measured when we are talking about energy equity? Is it truly equitable when you have subsidies or not? When it comes to value, what we hear is, how do we address upskilling and workforce development? So what is the value that the transition is bringing to this country or to the region? Are there more jobs being created? Is there a social transformation as part of this transition as well? And then we have the cost of technology as well as the knowledge transfer. So along with upskilling, who is having the access to this technology, and how is that being shared, and how is the diffusion of technology happening? And when it comes to the access to energy, it is not just about having the light bulb on, but also about the productive use of energy. So really redefining modern energy minimum and saying that that the amount that is required to drive economic change needs to be higher, and that should become a threshold that we need to target and to reach when we are setting policies. And when it comes to environmental sustainability, is, like I've said earlier, beyond CO2 emissions. It's a shift beyond using just CO2 as a measure, and also going beyond net zero to really talk about the planetary boundaries, which are being crossed. What are those red flags? What are those red threads that we need to follow? Circular solutions and mining impacts. So circularity is a key element that has come up, and it should be part of not just the circular carbon economy framework, but also circularity of materials and minerals, which is in connection to critical minerals. How is the recycling rate of all of those critical minerals? How do you keep them in the loop? So circularity as a principle across the value chain of renewable energy supply and solutions, and across the entire energy ecosystem. And another key participant in maintaining this balance or supporting this pillar is the role of corporates and the rise of corporate participation in energy transitions, especially through frameworks such as the ESG. So there are more corporates who are participating, who are contributing really to hold this pillar up. And how do you measure that within our framework? So these are the things that we have seen as defining or changing in the definitions or measuring or measurement indicators that define these three pillars. But there is the fourth element within our energy transition, within our energy trilemma framework, which is what's holding this trilemma up, what is helping this balancing act, and that is the health of the country context, as we call it. So what's the macroeconomic environment? How is the strength of the governance system, and what does it mean for stability for investment and innovation? And what I have in bold are the new elements that we have captured, and those include political stability is of course important, but what does that mean in conjunction to climate change and climate policies? In the Latin American context, we have heard from different clusters. There are different clusters of countries where there is one cluster which has long-term visions, and those which don't have. And those who have long-term visions have withstood the political shifts and changes. Then the energy market design or redesign to ensure that it captures the future challenges of the transformed energy system. When it comes to stability of investment and innovation, we once again see the social license to operate is very critical, and the transparency of contracts is a lesson learned from the oil and gas sector, which should start appearing within the future energy systems, so that we can really improve the investment sentiment. Now, the World Energy Trilemma report itself, I will drop the link into the chat. We have regional chapters, and these are just the highlights of what we see from Africa. So as you can see, we do score all of the countries. This is the link. This on the right is the ranking within the region, who's on the top, who are the top or who are the leaders, and what are their scores across these three pillars, as I've explained it. And then we have collected signals from the region, from our members in the region and their networks, to identify what are the key challenges of energy security within the African context. Of course, it is about the continued, the balancing act of keeping fossil fuel-based energy to maintain energy security as well. The limited access to modern energy services. I think I've heard that. I think Jackie, you had mentioned in yours about improving the services and how it's being delivered. The issue with infrastructure and the conflicting geopolitical interests in the continent of Africa, as well as economic and governance barriers, are all challenges we see within the energy security pillar. Within energy equity, we see there is a lot of improvement. A lot of the the top improvers for energy equity are from the African context, and we do have more details in our report. But we still see there's an unequal access and reliability situation. But the rise of regional interconnections and integrations are enabling economies of scale and improving that. There's growing market competition, and there's more affordable energy prices in general, but it's still there's a lot of way to go forward, and more reliable energy services as well as macroeconomic benefits are coming up in the conversations around energy equity. Environmental sustainability, there's a rise in investment in renewables. We see development of hydrogen corridors and hydropower, which are connected to economic development as well. So there is a shift in the way contracts are being made, how it's being addressed, how all parties and stakeholders are being involved and given equal voice in the way contracts are developed. Collaborations are becoming much more really mutual, with mutual benefits for all the parties involved, with shared benefits such as job creation and technology transfer. We have some examples of managing the energy trilemma. So we have that as a segment where we find policies or signals which do take care of the trade-offs or tick the boxes across more than one of the three pillars, and that and what we see is the increasing tension between security, access, and sustainability targets. There are elements where this tension is happening, where trade-offs are happening, and growing commitment to energy diplomacy and regional cooperation to address these challenges is what we see as one of the tools in the toolbox in the African context. Now, moving into the futures element, the idea is to really stress test, the policies and this trilemma and the three pillars within different scenarios. In the Council's world, we have two distinct scenarios, which are exploratory and plausible scenarios. We call them scenarios foundations. There's rocks and rivers. One is about the The ROCs is about collaboration with actors like us, so it's a bit more fragmented, the world. It is characterized by slow economic growth, by diminished benefits from global trade, economies of scale, and technology. So that would be a place where some of those regional integrations might not go through. Institutions determine choices with a narrow context of self-interest driven collaborations. Policy converges at multiple levels of actors sharing the same established interests. And there's a robust and scalable national policy framework. So that's the kind of signals or the style that the ROCs world is. And the rivers world, on the other hand, is alignment of actors with us. So getting more people to collaborate and work beyond silos and beyond their actor groups and let's say comfort zones. And it's characterized by economic growth, remains fragmented, but with new forms of cooperations emerging. International consensus is fragile, but active in pockets. Markets are shaped by digital disruption and innovation. Investment rushes into sustainability and advanced technologies, and there's a recognition of new opportunities through the supply chain alignment. So these are the two worlds of scenarios, foundations that the council has, and what we use them for is to really stress test policies and targets within this kind of broader geopolitical kind of broader plausible scenario, different characteristics that we have, and really discuss what it means from the energy trilemma perspective. What are the trade-offs and how would they change? What tools do you have to balance the energy trilemma? With that, I come to the end of my presentation, and I would like to connect you to the idea of the World Energy Council, which is the the humanizing energy element. We like to connect the socio-economic transformations which need to happen to drive the energy transitions forward. We are going into our Congress in Riyadh in 2026, and we have launched our theme, which is inspiring transformations and delivering transitions. And the theme really is to inspire and aspire the practical and actionable opportunities. So that's where we're getting to. It's not just about the targets and roadmaps, but really what do we need to do to get there? How do we need to collaborate and work with each other and learn from each other? And that's how we, as a community, use our tools and our frameworks to understand what can we do best from those who are already doing it. What are the lessons they have learned, successes or failures? And the trilemma is a good example because you can find who are the top rankers who are doing and what are they doing, and see if that works within your context, and then apply the scenarios thinking, which is what this conference is about, to see are those trade-offs going to work? Because at the end of the day, energy policy pathfinding requires that you tick the 3 boxes as best as we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reshma, for this exciting presentation. I know more of these discussions will be unpacked in the energy cluster later on in the conference, so I do encourage colleagues to join the clusters. I've seen already there are a lot of questions in the chat box, both from Yaki's presentations and then from Reshma, so we do encourage you to join the next session, which is the clustering, so that we can unpack more discussions on these issues that have been raised. To go to our next presenter, I in particular like the topic for this presentation. I don't know why they chose this particular topic. Yaki spoke about the demographics, the youthful population, and the topic is Generation Z, or Gen Z as we call it, apathy, anarchy, activism, and the future of Africa. And to do that is Brownie Williams, who is a partner at Flash Trend South Africa. Over to you, Brownie.
Thank you very much. Okay, so as mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you a bit about some of the work that we've done, or I've been invited to talk to you about a project that I've been working on with my business, Flex Trends, but also with the youth research agency called Student Village, where we looked at young people in the African continent and in South Africa in particular to figure out what is going on with them at the moment. And the reason this is so important is that as much as we can talk about energy transitions, we can talk about the drivers of technology, we can talk about policies and what those perfect policies could and should look like. But ultimately, when it comes to the future is the sum total of the choices that we as human beings make. And those choices are quite often a reflection of our own degree of optimism for our future, both individually and collectively across our nations and across our continent. And one of the things that has certainly been disturbing us as people who do want to look at the future is the risk as well as the potential reward that is wrapped up with Africa's well-spoken about demographic dividend. We're all very used to hearing about the demographic dividend in our continent. We know that's coming up. We know we've got effectively one generation to turn our human capital into exactly that, into capital rather than being a liability going forward. What is concerning to us, of course, is the degree of apathy so many young people across the world, yes, but also in our continent have towards their own futures. And quite often this is due to a lack of ability to access their own agency due to endowments and choice constraints that are constraining their ability to fully engage in their agency, but also their lack of optimism around things like democracy, which has been so hard won in our continent. So anyway, those were the questions that we set out to explore. And yes, of course, we have looked at trends and hard data like the other presenters have spoken about. But the other point is, when it comes to trying to figure out the future, quite often the story lies in the anecdote and lies in the thoughts that individual people are having, and perhaps not sharing in workshops and informal survey reports and that sort of thing. So we really need to get down to so-called grassroots level to connect with young people to figure out what is going on in their heads. What is it that they are thinking about their own futures, about their families' futures, about their nation's futures, and about our collective future in the world at large? So the questions that we asked in this report, which is available for free via the QR code you can see on the screen over there, looked at the personal, the professional, and of course the public or civic lives of young people, what it is that they were thinking about. And 3 themes emerged, which we've also unpacked and unraveled into future scenarios, which you can also engage with. I'll share the link with that in just a second. But those 3 themes, I think, are critical for any policymaker or anyone who is interested in actually directing change into the future. And those 3 themes are that of apathy or non-participation, even when there is the opportunity to participate. Anarchy, we've started to see undercurrents of almost nihilistic youthful expression of energy in an undirected manner in order to kind of resist against systems and spaces that are simply not making space for young people. This is a reaction to the choice constraints that I spoke about. And then there's the most positive theme, that of activism. There is a huge activist culture on our continent among young people that we can lean into for positive directed change to get the momentum we need to implement some of those policy ideas we've heard about from the other speakers. One of the things that stuck out for me in the previous presentation is, of course, this idea of you need social buy-in to change if you want to get change to move forward. So you, of course, are welcome to interrogate some of the insights that we put into the report there, but I thought it would be interesting just to kind of go through a bit of our philosophy and as to how we approach this research, because I think there are lessons to any sorts of policy that wants to be stress tested against kind of public opinion, because if people are not actually acting or buying into or supporting what you want to do, we are not going to be able to move forward collectively as a continent, as we absolutely need to if we want to take advantage of this very small window of opportunity for us to reverse those trends that we've seen today, those trends of falling behind, those trends of the greater divide between our continent and that of the rest of the world. So anyway, just to get back to basics, our philosophy, certainly at the organization that I work with, is that if we want to change the world, we first have to understand the world as it is. And when it comes to understanding the world, we understand the world by understanding people, individuals. What are people thinking and feeling? Not just what they are saying and professing in public, but actually what are people really thinking? Because that's where resistance to change comes from. And that's also where opportunity and inspiration to change comes from too. The other thing we need to think about when it comes to the future is that quite often our optimism and agency towards the future is determined by the sorts of forecasts that we put out. And those include the sorts of scenarios that the likes of ourselves put out into the world. If we are concerned about young people having an apathy or an almost accelerationist destructive approach to our future, that's largely quite often due to poor leadership coming from us, older generations, and from people in positions of power and privilege who are putting out forecasts that people either don't believe or do not want to get behind. And that's why it's so important for us in the futures space to engage in tools like foresight, to broaden that window of opportunity in a credible way that people can both believe is possible, but also want to be a part of. And that is, certainly from our research, one of the critical insights that is lacking, not just in our continent, but globally. But I think it's particularly critical for our continent, given that we have so many young people who are looking up to us for ideas to how to fix the future and finding very little. Some of the comments I was watching earlier today also shared that we are lacking leaders here that can guide people credibly and hopefully towards the future. Given the poly and perma crisis we are facing at the moment, of course, this becomes a critical skill that we have to get right. We have to be able to paint pictures of the future that people want to participate in and see a place for themselves within. Otherwise, we end up falling into those traps of apathy or of anarchy as opposed to proactive activism, which is the critical, unique selling proposition of our continent. Young, hopefully hopeful and optimistic people who are still excited about growth and about moving forward. This could be our killer app, but it could also be our destruction if we're not able to harness that energy productively. So anyway, when we go about trying to change people's choices, because as I said, the future is nothing but the sum total of the choices that all of us together as a continent, as a country, as a society make, one of the things we have to start doing is to change the sorts of stories that we're telling about what is possible. And the tools that we have to change those stories quite often either fall into, as I mentioned earlier, sort of either forecasting, coming down to this is what's likely, this is what's going to happen, such as many of the trends we've heard today, but it also can be reframing what is possible in the form of stories. And this is where scenarios can become very powerful, not just as policy tools, but also as public sentiment and public optimism and agency nudging tools. So what we do in our work is we go out, obviously do horizon scanning, look out for signals, but we also have conversations with people and bring out those insights that can inform new stories about what the future can look like. And what we do with those stories then is we compile them into scenarios that people can envisage themselves living in. So you can almost try on a world that maybe you feel comfortable in, or maybe a world that makes you feel very, very uncomfortable. But by being able to put yourself into that future and connect with empathy with your future self and with your future community, that future becomes a visceral reality that you can either actively work towards envisaging and actualizing, or that you can have the agency to outright reject. And that's, of course, our hope with the sorts of scenarios that we build. And we build these scenarios using very 360-degree worldviews, using our world weaving methodology, which is basically just a scanning tool to make sure that those future scenarios we use to encapsulate current sentiment, current trends, but then roll them out into the future. We make sure we're scanning across like all different aspects of the horizon. We use this particular model. There's many other models we can use too. But these models are helpful for making sure that world that we are envisaging for people in the future and inviting people to try on feels realistic and feels credible, even if it does feel incredible at the same time. So in terms of timeline, the way we rolled out our sort of scenarios for this particular set is we rolled forward to the year 2044, and we put together 3 different scenarios for that time period, which is 20 years in the future. So in other words, when young people, when Generation Z on our continent today is going to be around about sort of 40-ish years old. So it's a challenge to young people, the set of scenarios, to say that even if right now your choice constraints are the results of choices the previous generations have made, by the time we get to 2044, you are going to be either opening or closing choice constraints for the next generation, Generation Alpha, which is really going to be Generation Africa, if you look at the numbers. And that's the generation we have to be setting up to succeed. So as I said, the 3 scenarios we brought out are related to those 3 macro themes that came out of our primary research of firsthand conversations with young people on our continent. And they reflect those different attitudes of either apathy, checking out, hoping the problems will be solved by someone else, or anarchy, which is, of course, if that youthful energy doesn't find a productive place in our society, how do they then respond to break rather than build a system that refuses to hold space for them? And the third most positive one, which is the bridge builder scenario, which looks at leaning into the activism theme that we picked up among young people who have a very high, as we call it, social justice barometer, care very deeply about their continent, about their future, and about making this place work. I think one of the key insights that I want to pause on here, we got out of our primary research, is how many young Africans don't want to leave our continent, but feel they might have to in order to build a life for themselves, which for me is really a tragedy. And how do we change that narrative around? Well, we do it by presenting stories and scenarios like this that have a place for everyone, that people can believe in working towards. And then, of course, we try and sort of articulate them or to actualize them by actually bringing some sort of souvenirs from those desirable futures back forward to today. So in other words, envisaging what citizens' assemblies, for example, could look like on our continent, or what it would look like if we had in Africa sort of citizen endowments instead of maybe a universal basic income, maybe something closer to what the likes of Norway have, for example, with their oil endowments. How do we make sure that young people have a stake in the future and that they believe that that stake is something that they're going to actually be able to stake claim to once again by the time that they get there? But anyway, these scenarios were designed to challenge and to provoke. They are available again on our website. They are available for free. They're available in sort of audio-visual formats and in written formats. And they're available to engage with and to start conversations about getting that social buy-in to hopefully change young people's attitude about the future to being one of very directly, and I can use a direct quote from one of the young men that we interviewed for this project, who, when I asked him why he was not participating in the democracy that his parents had fought so hard to bring for his generation, and why he was not stepping up to become the leader or to create a new political party if he felt that there was no one that was worth following at the moment. And he told me, well, he's waiting for us, the older generations, to die off before he's going to sort of step up and take his place, which is a huge tragedy. We want people to feel they have space to participate in the systems, in the processes, in the structures, in the democracies, in the economies that we've set up right now when they're still young. So if we can get people to change their hearts and minds in just a little bit today, by the time we get to 2044, we could have very different versions of this continent. And just to sort of sum up what I've been saying here, I think that the things that we need to be focusing on, as much as we can talk about policy, and we should have policies that we want to follow, we know what works, we know what doesn't work, we know what we need more of, what we should have less of. We know we need to embrace technology. We know we need to embrace sort of more economic trade with the rest of the world. We know we need to get our house in order. But in order to do that, we need to have young generations who are optimistic about their future, not blind hope, but rather practical optimism, that really do believe their future together and as individuals is going to be better and can lean into those best case scenarios we've heard articulated today, but also that our young people have agency. And that also requires policies to make sure that young people have the ability to cast their votes, that have the ability to participate in civic and in the public society. We need to make space for young people to exercise that agency, and we have to include that. So that's why I think collective and individual agency is one of the key issues we see coming out of here. And collective agency, again, I think is also a conversation we need to be having, not just as nations in the African continent, but as a continent together. I think some of the subtext we've heard today, that Africa's future really does depend on us working together rather than working apart. So optimism and collective agency become those sort of critical levers we need to lean into if we want to have the more positive scenarios rather than the more negative scenarios going into the future. And I'm going to pause there, but I do encourage you to look at both the research report and the scenarios report to see how humanity and the future intersect, because we can think of technology and policy as being drivers of the future, but rather they are enablers of human visions as to what is possible and what is preferable going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brownie, for this phenomenal presentation. It's quite interesting from the perspective of young people. Indeed, we cannot talk about the future of Africa without discussing the youth, that the future belongs to them. So we are grateful for this presentation, and for colleagues who are asking, we will do share the presentation to you from both Reshma and Frankie Brownie later on. So we will now transition to our first breakout session for the day, covering the work, social and geopolitical forecasting. You will be redirected to 2 breakout rooms. You can switch the breakout rooms at any point in time. So you can select one of the 2 sessions. Before we get into the breakout room, just a few housekeeping rules that there will not be any translation during the breakout session. We do apologize for that. And the live streaming on our YouTube channel also come to an end with the end of this session. So please do select which breakout room that you want to be, whether it is exploring work, living, and social dynamics in the future, or global power and geopolitical shifts. Let us engage and discuss more and unpack some of the issues that are affecting the continent of Africa in these areas. So with that, I would like to thank you for joining this session and enjoy the rest of the conference in the breakout session. Please do press the button on which